Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is Philip Freneau, the father of American poetry. Before we get started, I want to remind you to hit like, and if you're new here, subscribe. I put out videos about the American Revolution 5 days a week. So Philip Freneau was from a wealthy New Jersey family, and as such, he attended college. He went to what was then called the College of New Jersey, but we now know it today as Princeton University. While he's there, among many other things, he made fast friends with one James Madison, who would go on to do things like be president and write the Constitution. So anyway, Freneau was a poet at heart, and even though he wrote a few pamphlets against Great Britain, he ended up going to the West Indies for several years. But when the American Revolution broke out, he ended up joining a privateer ship. He became captain of a privateer ship, and they went around trying to capture British ships to, first of all, prevent them from attacking Americans on the continent, and second of all, making a lot of money looting and plundering the vessels. Unfortunately for Freneau, he was captured and put on a prison ship, and while here for 6 months, he kind of languished and got pretty sick, but was fortunate enough to be released eventually, and apparently his health did fully recover, which was not always the case. In fact, usually not the case for people put on prison ships. Either way, Freneau goes to New York City and starts writing in certain newspapers, and he gets persuaded by his old friend James Madison to become a Democratic Republican, or at that time as they were called, anti-administration. And he wrote a few things against the George Washington administration. After this, Madison convinces his friend Thomas Jefferson, who was then Secretary of State, to actually hire Philip Freneau, and Freneau was hired as the official language interpreter for the State Department of the newly created United States. Now, this is interesting because other than English, the only language that Freneau could speak was French. And at the time, the official linguist would have to know, they were talking to Spain, they were talking to the Netherlands. There were several languages, and many founders at this time could speak Latin and Greek pretty fluently. So the fact that he only had one other language he was fluent in is peculiar, but he was really being hired by Jefferson for his under-the-radar work publishing against the administration. Specifically, he usually published against Alexander Hamilton. And when he was hired by Thomas Jefferson, Philip Freneau goes down to Philadelphia, where the government was then stationed, and he started working for the National Gazette. And again, he was mostly responding to Alexander Hamilton directly, but it's strange that an employee of the State Department was criticizing the very state he was employed by. Now, by the time John Adams becomes president, Philip Freneau seems to get sick of politics, and he ends up starting to publish poetry. He had done this a little bit when he was younger in the West Indies, but now he really started going for it. In fact, he's the first American that really made a career out of publishing poetry, and he made enough money selling his poems that he could retire at a very young age and just continue writing his poetry. And he experimented in addition to natural poems, which he really liked, he experimented with Gothic poems, primitive writings, and romantic poems, all of which were very successful. As I said, because of his success, he is considered to be the father of American poetry. There were other poets who were publishing at the time, many of whom were women, specifically, and also other, founders who were in the Continental Congress and such as Francis Hopkinson is probably the most notable other major founder who was writing poetry at the time. But as I said, Freneau was able to make a career out of it, which was extraordinary for the time, and his influence would extend beyond his lifetime. He spent about 30 years publishing poetry, and the second generation of developing writers who would come after him, including James Fenimore Cooper, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Whitman, all of these people were people who had studied Philip Freneau when they were younger. So his legacy lived on then, and to a degree still lives on now with poets we have today. So that's the life of Philip Freneau. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit like, and I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.